what is called this Indological and textual approach in Indian sociology. I think that we are going to discuss today, and who are the people associated with this Indological and textual approach. I think we'll be talking about G.S. Ghurye, we'll be talking about Ruiz Dumo, we'll be talking about Radha Kamal Mukherjee. I think all these thinkers are clubbed into this particular approach called Indological and textual approach to understand Indian society. You know, I'll be just dealing with G.S. Ghurye today, but before that, let me give a brief introduction. What is this Indological and textual approach is all about? What it means to a student of society? You know, the first point is, when you talk about Indology, you are referring to such knowledge of understanding society which deals with interpretation of ancient text and linguistic studies, specifically in the context of culture, archaeological knowledge, sociological interpretations, anthropological approach, and ethnographic evidences. What I am trying to argue is what is called this Indological approach. So, Indological approach specifically deals with how to interpret ancient text. What does mean ancient text? Specifically, when you talk about ancient text, which refers to the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and the epics, and all these granths. But you may say that this is a Hindu-oriented approach to understand society, but you can go beyond that. These epics, you can talk about the Pandulipis available on Buddhist literature. You can talk about the Pandulipis available in Jain literature. All are part of Indological approach. But here, when we be dealing with Indological and textual perspective, specifically in the context of studying Indian society, as far as our understanding is concerned, as far as the thinkers are concerned, they largely focus on Hindu text and Hindu epics and dharma granthas. So we'll be talking about it, but if you are interested to explore and find out what are the multiple other traditions are there which are part of this Indological approach, which can be part of the Indological approach, that you are free to do by referring to these other sources of literature like Buddhist literature or Jain literature or even Sikh literature also. I think there also you can see how this Indological approach can be further strengthened by exploring all these texts, which I will not be going to deal with in details. So the point again here is to look at ancient texts and the linguistic studies specifically, which are supposed to talk about Indian society, Indian social realities, Indian way of life. I think these aspects are essentially referred to the Indological approach. This is number one. Number two, how this Indological approach is being further supplemented and supported by other sources of analysis and interpretations. Specifically, you can say that how archaeology, how anthropology, how numismatic, how ethnographic evidences, all these things supplement to the interpretation of these ancient texts and this Vedic literature, epics, and the holy texts which is available in Indian society or Indian culture, you can say, for that matter. So this is first point about Indology, means interpreting ancient text, and it has to be substantiated by the interpretation given by the sociologist, by the archaeologist, by the anthropologist, by the ethnographic studies. All these things supplements to understand these ancient texts. This is the first point as far as Indological approach is concerned. Secondly, when you talk about Indological and textual perspective, then we have this thing in our mind that Indian society and culture are unique to itself, and it has to be understood in its context. That Indian society is specific to its context and situations. So therefore, it has to be understood by grasping its text and its way of life, which is largely given by the Indological text. So the second point what I am trying to talk about, that Indian society and culture are unique to itself and it has to be understood in its context. And the context is being provided by the epics or the dharma granthas, which are specifically designed texts to provide you a specific context to understand your society, understand individual behavior, understand the social nature. This is the second important point as far as Indological and textual perspective is concerned. While doing this is a third important point. When we are talking about Indological approach, it refers to, methodologically it refers to two things. One is called historical method, the other one is called comparative method. So methodological aspect while dealing with the Indological approach is historical and comparative. What is historical? You may have a question. Historical means narrating the text in a historical context and historical perspective. For that matter, Vedas and Upanishad, all these things has to be located in historical context. And how does this historical, context, or how does this epics and Mahabharata and Ramayana, which has, there are many sociologists say it's a mythos or mythology, but it has a context, and this context has to be understood, and it has to be understood methodologically in a historical context, and secondly in a comparative context. Now, what has to be compared? If you say it has to be comparative context, comparative to the present context, that I mean to say, comparative means how does we can compare it with the present context. So historically, how these epics came into being and how it has guided people and how it is guiding today, isn't it? So two methodological approach here, one is historical, the other one is comparative. So if you refer to these two methodological approach, there what are the sources we are going to deal with? We are dealing with Vedas, we are dealing with Purans, we are dealing with Manusmriti. I don't know, you may have a problem with the Manusmriti, Ramayana, Mahabharata and other texts. So these are the sources where we can deal with this approach, or this approach has evolved by referring to Vedas, Purans, Manusmriti, Ramayana, Mahabharata and others. So Indologist analyzes the social phenomenon by interpreting these classical texts. So what is being useful to us, that the Indian sociologist has used these Vedas, Purans, Manusmriti, Ramayana and Mahabharata to interpret and understand social life. So in that way, it is about the interpretation of the classical text, and that classical interpretation of these classical texts helps you to analyze the social phenomena pertaining to Indian society. Therefore, we call it a textual view or textual perspective.